Chapter 5. This wasn't what I'd been expecting at all. I sat up and stared at him, wide-eyed. Warn you? About what? Shaking his head, he stood up. We don't know. He called Crash from the hospital just before he died, and Crash says he didn't sound lucid, but he said Crash had to warn me. I hesitated, then laid back down. Do you think... Well, maybe he didn't know what he was talking about? If he had some kind of dementia, what did he die of? To the second question, Crash asked his doctor, and they don't know. It was some kind of insanity, but they could never pin down a source. He was dead less than a week after they brought him in. As for the first question, that's what I said. I have more respect for Dr. Holmes, than almost anybody else I know, but he could definitely have been demented. He paused here and looked at me for a second. Then he went on. But Crash says that he got a little worried because right after Emmett told him that, some scientists left Earth and headed this way. Some scientists he doesn't like. Dr. Holmes warned Crash, and then some scientists that Crash didn't like left Earth. That didn't sound all that suspicious to me, especially since there were a lot of people my cousin decided not to like, and not always for good reasons. A thought hit me. You don't think that's the Howitzes, do you? The doctor shook his head. Impossible. The scientists Crash referenced are both middle-aged men, not father and son. He shrugged and stood up. It could be nothing. It's probably nothing. Do you have to go? I begged. I didn't understand why I wanted him there so intensely, unless it was just the lingering memory of that terrible pain on the bridge. I need to check in on sickbay, but I'll come back down here to fill out my records if you want. That wasn't entirely what I wanted. I'd far rather he stay close, talk to me, sit with me. But I knew that was selfish, and he had struggled the past few weeks with finding time to complete his medical records. Thanks, I said. I'll be back soon. He turned and left the room. I tried to relax, listening to the soft whirring of the life support systems that always lulled me to sleep. My thoughts drifted to the puzzling, frightening incident on the bridge, and I began to ponder Crash's actions again. He was angry at the captain and Guilders now, I knew, and wouldn't speak to them for several days, or however long he stayed on board, whichever came first. He probably wouldn't stay long. He never did. Guilders would act like nothing had happened, in his usual stoic way. The captain would be frustrated, but as long as Crash caused no more trouble, he'd keep his temper. I remembered well the first time Crash had visited us on the Surveyor, the first confrontation between himself and our helmsman. Crash had challenged him to a maneuvering contest through the hazard zone. I hadn't known what that was at the time, but later Guilders explained to me it was a network, almost a maze of trash pockets, so confusing that the most seasoned pilots were often lost there. Crash had been 27 at the time, and even more cocky than he was now, and he hadn't taken his loss very well. Yes, of course, Guilders had beaten him. What did he expect? Guilders had been maneuvering since before Crash was born. Since then, it had been one big contest after another with the two of them. At least through the years, Crash had come to have genuine respect for Guilders, but even so, he got angry with him frequently. The two of them just had such different outlooks, not only with regard to piloting, but life in general. How Guilders felt about Crash was unknown, but it was my opinion that he merely tolerated him. The captain was easily frustrated with Crash as well, and was significantly more outspoken about it than Guilders. However, he had an open respect for the younger man's abilities, and in fits of admiration had declared that Crash would be an asset to the crew. Fortunately, Crash never accepted. We all knew that with him on the crew for any extended period of time, the captain would be driven mad. Crash was his own authority, and had never been one to bow to anyone's superiority in any area. The door slid open as I concluded these thoughts, and I half sat up, then recognized the doctor with a smile. Everything fine up there, Doctor? He nodded, and I noticed a large record pad tucked under his arm. I stifled a sigh. It was a good opportunity for him to get his work done. Usually I didn't mind, but I shuddered. I wanted someone to talk to, and who better than my dear doctor? Settling himself in the chair across the room, he turned on the pad and began making out his reports. I fidgeted for a few minutes, wishing I could get up and do something. I wasn't used to inactivity. The doctor had said I needed rest, though. Perhaps I could read? My thoughts were interrupted by a beep at the door. "Come in," I called. The door slid open and young Lieutenant August Howitz walked in, balancing a covered metal tray in his hands. The doctor looked up from his work and frowned. He laid the pad down and stared at the newcomer. August looked back and forth between me and the doctor with slight embarrassment. "The cook needed someone to bring up your dinner," he explained, "and the captain chose me." The doctor raised his eyebrows and I sighed. I wish the captain would give up his matchmaking on my account. But then, knowing it wasn't the lieutenant's fault and not wanting to make him feel bad, I smiled. "Thank you. I am getting hungry." I reached for the tray, glad at least that the doctor was there. I had a definite feeling that he wouldn't have liked me to be alone with the young man. "Well," said the doctor, "you've done your duty, Lieutenant." The lieutenant flushed. "He told me to stay and wait for the dishes so the galley staff wouldn't have to bother with them." I glanced over at the doctor, who frowned again. I couldn't help smiling. I foresaw a decided talk between him and Captain Trent in the near future. "I suppose," the doctor said at last, "you have to do what the captain orders." August nodded. "I'm sorry, sir." The doctor gestured to the chair that I usually occupied. "Have a seat, boy." Looking more awkward than ever, the young man sat down. I knew the doctor meant to be kind, and I tried to straighten out the situation. "I beg you, when you see the captain again, tell him from me he shouldn't worry about my situation any more. I'm quite happy as I am." His relieved nod was almost amusing. "I'll tell him." There was a moment of silence, then the doctor asked him, "Are you feeling better?" "Much better, thank you, doctor," he said. Then with a moment of hesitation he turned to me. "And you, Miss Andi, I heard you had an accident?" "I'm feeling fine now, thank you." I finished my soup and began to nibble the bread. "Where were you when we hit the asteroid?" "I was actually asleep in our quarters. The crash woke me and I had to get up and take care of some of my father's things. He has a lot of tools and machinery in there, and they got knocked around pretty badly." "What does your father do?" the doctor asked. "Here he's the first engineer. On Earth he was an inventor." "Andy's an inventor?" August's eyes widened. "Really?" I smiled but shook my head. "Just a hobby. I don't do much with it." I paused to take a drink. "What has your dad invented?" He shrugged. "He doesn't really make things for the general public. Special computers and service technology, that kind of thing." "And what about you?" the doctor probed. August frowned. "I'm a navigator. I've done a little electrical engineering, but nothing like him." "Do you always work together?" I asked, swallowing the last bite of bread and watching as he stood. "No." He walked over and took the tray from me. "After I graduated, I went to space alone. I was a navigator on the Beagle. He came and picked me up about a month ago." "Why?" I asked. "He'd heard that your engineer was planning an extended leave for his honeymoon and decided to take the position, and he heard that your navigator had recently left as well. I guess he just thought I'd be good for the position." The lieutenant shifted the tray to a more comfortable position as he stood talking, and I thought I detected a wistfulness in his voice, as if he hoped his father thought he'd be good for the position, but rather doubted it. The door slid open as he finished, and Crash strode in. "Had your dinner, Aunt? Well, who's this?" August turned to face him. "Lieutenant Howitz, navigator, sir." "I don't remember seeing you on the bridge." "He was resting, Crash," I explained. "Health problems. Lieutenant, this is my cousin, Eagle Crash." August's eyes widened, and he balanced the tray on his arm, then carefully put out his hand to shake Crash's. "A pleasure, sir." He turned back to me. "Eagle Crash is your cousin?" Crash grinned, as he always did when any reference was made to his fame. "She's lucky that way." His grin faded when August turned to face him again, and he peered at the pale face and dark eyes for a moment. "Have I met you somewhere?" "No, sir. I'm sure I would remember meeting you." Crash straightened up. "What did you say your name was again?" "Howitz, August Howitz." "Austrian, are you?" "I grew up there, sir, but I am a United States citizen by birth." "I see.
Well, you don't have to sir me.
Yes, sir. No, sir. August flushed and I stifled a giggle. He stood a bit straighter and shifted the tray to a more comfortable position. I suppose I should be taking this down to the galley.
Yes, I suppose you should.
The lieutenant turned and nodded at me and the doctor, then hurried out, obviously intimidated by Crash's commanding, confident manner as well as his reputation. The doctor cleared his throat and picked up his pad. If you're going to be up here for a minute, I'm going to have some dinner myself. When can I get up? I asked. He looked at me and thought about it. Then he came to a conclusion. Right now I'd like you to keep resting for tonight. When I come back, we can talk about you getting up in the morning. Yes, sir. He left the room, and I watched with a slight sigh as the door closed behind him. I already missed work, missed eating in the big mess hall with everyone else, missed bantering with the doctor throughout the afternoon. I wanted things to go back to normal.